Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Ty G. Jones, President of the Texas Caucus of Black School Board Members and Trustee of Lancaster Independent School District. We are excited today for a conversation. Race isn't rocket science. It's harder than rocket science. We have three great panelists who are going to be visiting with you today, and our moderator is Cinto Ramos, President of MASBA, the Mexican American School Board Association. We've had a lot of trials and tribulations over the past few weeks, and actually over 400 years. So today will be a discussion in which we're going to highlight those events and really look at what can we do. Just thinking back, 1955, Emmett Till galvanized the efforts for the Civil Rights Movement. And now the death of George Floyd is motionalizing another movement. So I think some of those topics will be discussed today, and we'll have an opportunity to kind of get some different views and vantage points. Now I turn it over to President Cinto Ramos.
Thank you, Ty. Appreciate you. Thank you to everybody who's been able to log in today to pick up on this conversation with our friends. I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing the three amazing human beings on the screen right now. We have Miss Erica Mitchell from Atlanta Public Schools. She's also a member of the CUBE Steering Committee. She's also on the National Black Council and currently serving as the secretary. Next, we have Mr. Quentin Q. Phillips. He's part of the Black Caucus, part of the Mexican American School Board Association, and also a trustee and a second vice president of Fort Worth Independent School District. And then last but certainly not least, we have the Honorable Makai Ali, who serves as the president of Compton Unified that is in Cali. And he's done just about everything. He's helped instrumental with CAPC over in California, the School Board Association, also immediate past chair of the Council of Urban Boards of Education under the National School Board Association. So that also means that he has had a seat at the NSBA table. And all three individuals came to mind when we wanted to put this panel together because they're proven. They're equity warriors. They have what we call receipts when it comes to advocating and fighting for young people, especially along the lines of today's topic and today's theme. First, we'd like to start off by asking each one of our panelists, and we'll begin with our friend Erica. We just want to check in with you as a human being to bring that space of humanity in here. How are you holding up? Can you think of a word, of a feeling, of how you're feeling, and then elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Yes, thank you, Cinto, for allowing me to share this platform with our other colleagues within this circle. I will say that the feeling that I feel is hurt and anger and pain. And I can't sum it up in one word because you feel all these emotions, especially as you're looking at social media and the news and you're seeing your citizens and residents in Atlanta being shot and killed just recently. Rayshard Brooks, and his oldest daughter attend APS school, Atlanta Public Schools, and I hurt for that family. You know, his life could have been saved. His life could have been spared if we just look at different ways to approach a situation. And I think we have to take the time to look at our approach and our training and our education, because this happened too many times. And everyone reached a breaking point, and I think that's where our city is. The majority of our residents, especially the African American community, we're at our breaking point. So how many of our Black men and Black women are going to be killed before we said enough is enough? So it's the hurt, it's the pain, it's the anger, it's all those emotions in one. And I take it one day at a time, because I'm raising a Black son and I'm raising a Black daughter. And I have, my father's still here. He's 79. He lived through all of the turmoil of the 50s, the 60s, the Jim Crow, the segregation. I have a brother, a younger brother. I have cousins. I mean, we're experiencing this type of behavior every day. But how do we fix it? How do we change it? And what are we going to do to break the systematic racism?
Thank you, Erica. Why don't we come over to you, Q? How are you holding up, my friend? What's the one word check in and give us a little background on that one word.
Yeah, I would say the one word would be roller coaster. If that can encompass one word, man. So I'll begin by first, saying thank you to Texas Caucus of Black School Board members, our leader, Ty G. Jones, man. Thank you for all that you do in holding us down. And also huge shout out to Mexican American School Board Association, pillars of all of our communities and doing the work, making sure that brown and black folks are heard, at the table in the way that we're supposed to be. And along with that, my condolences to Sister Erica, to her community, for Rayshard Brooks, another black man killed at the hand of law enforcement yet again, and only imagining what that's going to do and has already done to her city and to our nation when it comes to that. But as far as the word, yeah, roller coaster. I mean, it really is whatever moment you happen to catch me on. Sometimes I get moments like pre-call with this call that we had today, getting to see my brother Micah Ali, getting to see Erica Mitchell, chop it up a little bit with Ty, seeing my brother Cinto, just being in the presence of those people who I know that I have this extreme love for and have extreme love for me, those people that I can be with and laugh and joke to where it does my heart good and it heals me. And in these other moments of just being down deep in trying to move past negative thoughts and feelings, trying to suppress hate, because that's what will rise up in me sometimes when I'm seeing what's happening to my people. Having to try to suppress that, knowing that there's a greater good, knowing that there's leadership that I have to exude and work that has to be done. So having to suppress some of the emotions that some are able to convey, just knowing that there's a different role that I have to play in all this. But it's only so long the ends so they can continue to happen before even that aspect of our humanity as leaders come out. So it's the roller coaster, man. Trying to maintain strength for a black wife in this world right now, trying to exude wisdom for 2 black sons, and trying to show leadership for 83,000 young people, close to 90% of them being black and brown, and hoping that we're leading them in the right direction towards sustainability, towards their own vocal leadership, and towards their activism as well. So it's a roller coaster, man.
Thank you, Q, man. I appreciate you speaking your truth. Micah Ali, man, how are you holding up? Talk to us. Give us a one word, how you feeling, and tell us a little bit about that word.
Well, the word I'd like to use this morning is the word confluence. And confluence would underscore what we're experiencing today in this country, not just the issues with respect to the racial injustice, but I'm talking about the disparities. We're looking at disparities relative to the impacts of SARS coronavirus on the Black community. We're looking at the disparity of justice and how that's administered within the Black community. Then we're talking about the racial disparities and the inequities that exist within public education, which has been ground zero for the fight for racial justice in this country, as far as I'm concerned. And so when you look around, you see an opportunity of the unbiased light that is shone, if you will, upon places where people ought to receive promise. I know folk on the call are probably religious, and the Bible in the Malachi 3:10, it talks about the promise and the provision. If people are not able to be afforded promise and hope, you get exactly what you see. So when you question the reaction of Black, brown, yellow, white, even the red man, you question, why are folks acting in this way? Well, we failed them as a society. We failed them as public educators. We've failed them, and we consistently fail them because one question we rarely ask individuals: what do you need? Not what I want to give you, what do you need? And so for many of us, we come up with all sorts of ideas as what we believe folk ought to have. And we oftentimes start off talking about jobs, and we're all talking about justice. Well, the reality is we've been talking about the same thing for far too long, and now you see direct confluence of not just ideology, perspective. You see a convergence of race with respect to fighting an injustice. Even allies have stepped up to the plate to simply show their support, because they too have witnessed what we see each and every day. Living in Compton, you see a lot. And oftentimes you can live a few cities over and you don't experience that level of disparity. But I go back to the word confluence. So now we're looking at a pandemic crisis. We're looking at racial injustice and the inequities that are faced each and every day by people of color. And then we're looking at the economy, which is a significant arm of this. And so you see in folk losing their jobs. Who's losing their job? Who's essential? I ask, who's essential? So when you say people of color, they're getting coronavirus at such a high and alarming rate, yeah, they're essentially going to work to be able to provide for those who are sitting at home. There again, a confluence of disparity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Honorable Ali, I appreciate all three of you and speaking your truth and letting us know where you're at right here, right now. We'd like to start with Erica. When we first visited with you, Erica, we did not, the incident or the shooting in Atlanta had not happened yet. And so, you know, as you come on to our panel, I think it would be appropriate for us to simply check in with you on what your thoughts are on what's been happening in Atlanta over the weekend.
Over the weekend, you have seen our people take to the streets, protesting the injustice, killing of Rayshard Brooks. You've seen the pain and anger. You've seen the lashed out. You've seen on TV the burnings, right? And who's behind the burnings, okay, of the Wendy's that he was shot at. There's I would say a center of chaotic frustration that is happening. I know our mayor she's in a challenging situation, and I can only hope and pray that she can guide us and lead us through this turmoil. But it's going to take a lot. It's going to take mending in a community that's been broken for so long. The disparities of African Americans in Atlanta, not speaking for all African Americans, but the majority of African Americans are living in underserved areas, low economic areas, not enough development. So when you look at, you know, day-to-day survival and people just trying to make it to the next day, right? You got kids selling water on the street because they got to feed brother and sister and make sure they bring money into the homes because they're lacking food, and we have food deserts. You have so many barriers that are affecting the African American population in this so-called Black Mecca, and our kids are at the bottom. And that's just not the way we need to move forward. So the accountability for all elected officials at this time need to step up to see how we can make a better situation for our African American population. But it's going to start with collaboration and trying and working with the people, not against the people. Because Rayshard Brooks didn't ask to be shot. He asked to go home. He would have walked home if he could, just because he didn't want to violate anything. And then it just transpired to something else with him losing his life. So the community is in uproar. They are upset. They want change now and not tomorrow. They won't want to wait to 10, 20 years. They want it now. We want it now. I want it now. So that's just the feeling that's across the board right now. That's the feeling across the city of anyone who can identify with what just took place early Saturday morning. I can't speak for all African Americans in the city, but I know I can speak for my district that I serve.
Thank you, Erica. Q, we go back a couple of decades. Met at Camp Anytown, when the conversations were always about social justice. What's coming up for you as you're watching the revolution, as some have been describing, watching young people taken to the streets of all walks of life? What's coming up for you with that? And then also talk to us a little bit about why you even came into this idea with you and your closest friends, who you call brothers and sisters, of what you call Community Frontline, and the work that y'all been doing right now revolving around this topic.
Indeed, appreciate you, brother. Yeah, it's an honor to call you family, Cito, man. It really is. And we've had plenty of situations where that definition of family has been tested, man. And each time, you've done more than enough to prove that you're worthy of that title, man. And hopefully, I've done the same to you. But yeah, man, as far as what's coming up for me, it's a sense of pride right now, man. So the thing is, when we're talking about and we're seeing them all over the country, but they're happening right here in Fort Worth, Texas as well, as far as the demonstrations, the protests, and everything. Unpopular opinion or not, but it gives me a sense of pride to be able to see young people, particularly Fort Worth ISD students, right there on the front line, leading the charge, wanting their voices to be heard. Same thing when I see, seeing Fort Worth ISD alumni doing the same thing. Now, there's a big difference between what we're talking about when we're talking about the demonstrations and the protests, and difference between the looting and the rioting and everything. And unfortunately, when we're in a society that we're in, we like to do this lump job of, if it happened during this time period, then everybody protesting is looting. Everybody that's protesting is rioting. It all falls under one banner of one organization, and our intellect should do us better than to know that that's not the case. So when I'm seeing what our young people are out doing, exercising themselves in the way that I can have a sense of pride, I'm very proud of them. And I encourage them to make sure that they allow their voices to continue to be heard and understanding what that transition looks like. So when we start talking about the transition, that's what we're beginning to see now in the city of Fort Worth, and that's what Community Frontline, a nonprofit that I'm proud to be one of the founders of, what we're doing. We're looking at what that transition looks like when the news cycle dies down, when the protests are not as prominent. How are we at the table helping those decision makers to make the best decisions that are going to make it to where it doesn't happen in the city of Fort Worth? And I can't say it doesn't happen, because the thing is, because we're human, because of sin, because of error, because of everything that entails humanity, there are going to be incidences. The test is, when those things happen, how do we react and what do we do, right? And so when we look at, so I know for me personally as a black man, and for the black people and the brown people that I have the luxury of being able to know and have a conversation with, it is one thing when a situation occurs where it's a black body that drops at the hands of an authority. It's a whole nother feeling when you automatically assume, rightfully so due to history, that nothing is going to happen to that individual that just took the life of your family member. When you know that an indictment is rare, when you know the grand jury is not really going to build this thing out, when you think that even if they get in front of a judge or a jury, that they're going to get to go home, and not only get to go home, but probably still patrol the same streets, or if they don't patrol the same streets, we'll just move a town over and be able to patrol those streets and continue in that systemic racism that's prevalent. So what we're trying to do with Community Frontline, like I said, this is a group of us just from Fort Worth, born and raised on the east side, and we just try to make sure that people are involved in their city, involved in our city, and making sure that we're doing things to help make our place better. We're trying to be at those tables right now, saying that, okay, mayor, police chief, council, school board, everyone, county commissioner's office, whoever are the decision makers, how are we going to move forward and putting best policy practices and procedures in place? So to try to be as preventative as possible for incidents occurring, for try to be preventative as possible for allowing racism to persist, But even in the event that it does happen, how are we going to have the type of response to where every resident within our lines can feel like, hey, they're doing the best they can. Hey, at least justice is being served. Hey, at least the processes make sense. Because right now, unfortunately, they don't make sense. It doesn't make sense to know that someone can take my life and it might be uncomfortable for them for a little while, but they'll get right back to it very shortly. And so those are kind of things that we have to begin to curtail. That's what we're trying to do with Community Frontline. And that's what I'm encouraging our young people to get on that side of the table as well. Both are needed. The protests are needed. The demonstrations are needed, but we also need you in that room with the decision makers to make those decisions.
Thank you, Q. Makai, as you always use the word, I would be remiss if I did not state the obvious that we have the president of Compton Unified on this webinar. And there's a lot of history that I think people may associate. And I'll use a nice statement that I associate that when I first met you, even just the name Compton seems to just capture people's attention, particularly around topics of race and law enforcement and police brutality. And so kind of what are your thoughts? Why don't you help us speak in your truth and then also help us transition to the topic of systemic racism and what that looks like for you and your school district. Again, I don't want to make any more assumptions. I really would just rather that we all hear from you directly on that topic.
Yeah, so Compton does invoke and connotes a tremendous amount of feelings and emotions within individuals throughout the world. And while I boast the fact that we've done very well academically, we have a tremendous amount of individuals throughout the world who are doing exceptional in academia, the judicial system, the military. We do have some serious heavyweights in the sports and the entertainment sphere. And so yes, gangster rap originated in Compton, and yes, F the police originated in Compton. One thing those gentlemen and all of the other folk had in common is to understand how the economy and economics plays and to the upliftment of people. What we have to do as educators, and what I've strived to do, having been elected by the people of this community for well over 10 years, is really talk about financial literacy and how understanding the economy ensures that we're not continually building students to be nothing more than servants, nothing more than just workers, but individuals who are in a position to negotiate something better for their lives, better for their families, better for their communities. The reality is very simple. If the police pull you over and you tell him, carry on, my lawyer is on speed dial, I'm quite confident they're gonna think a little deeper and say, okay, we know that we can harass and we can intimidate the less fortunate, the individuals who've been subjugated into poverty, individuals who struggle with drug addiction. We can just harass those who we know are voiceless without resources. Now, I'm not saying that police officers have absolved themselves in any kind of form or fashion of harassing affluent Black people. That's not the point. Not the point. Black judge get pulled over by the UCLA Police Department. They pull him over, they engage him. Subsequent to the engagement, he's sued. I guarantee they won't pull him over again. And what we have to do is utilize this moment to utilize and empower our students to be social justice warriors and social justice ambassadors, but to also become educated in the language that's spoken throughout the world. The language that drive economies. When you build up an economy, then on top of that, you set politics. And on top of that, you set the judicial system. And on top of that, you're able to then control the tip of the judicial sphere, which happens to be the police department. And the beginning of that, or at the other end of the continuum, is the educational system. And that educational system is then going to instill the necessary values, the necessary principles and beliefs within young people and empower them to transform their communities. When you look around the world, most people are subjugated to poverty throughout the world, an overwhelming majority of people of color. But one thing we have to remember and realize, many of them structure an economy. And I'm not saying that we should not discuss any of the issues that are impacting us today. What my argument is, we discuss all issues, but then we figure out a way to move towards the discussion of the economic construct so we can uplift our people. We need more than just people bloviating. We need more than just verbosity to uplift the people out of poverty. Folk need money, folk need opportunity, and folk need education.
Thank you, sir. Why don't we just stay with that for a little bit? For everyone that's on the webinar today, we will get to asking our friends on the panel ideas for solutions. And before that, I guess it's important to note, as what's coming up on the questions, is absolutely we get that race is a social construct, that it's a human-made phenomenon, and yet our entire society has gone without really knowing and understanding that. And that's the reason for the title, that race isn't rocket science. It's harder than rocket science. And the reason that it's harder is because at least we can teach about rocket science. But our K through 12 systems across this nation have purposefully and intentionally not taught about the social construct of race. And yet, so that's why these conversations are taking place. But to go back, Q and Erica, any thoughts on law enforcement, police, the hot topic of what role they're going to continue to play in school systems? Wanted to create that space for you to be able to speak on that should you want to.
Go ahead first, my sister.
Okay, thank you, Q. Well, I will share with you that at school we have our own police department, so we're not using Atlanta Police Department. So having our own police department, we have the flexibility to structure that department how we want them to respond, to approach our students. Now, I'm always looking at ways to rehabilitate our students, to give them options, to turn around their behavior. But our police department should be trained into handling these different types of personality from students. Need to be trained in trauma-informed, restorative justice. Those are just some of the things that I know that our police department is doing and working on. There's areas of improvement. But do you want, honestly, just ask the question, do you want your students to be policed? And, you know, some people say yes, some people say no. I honestly think there's a different approach to that. What does that look like? That's up to us as a board to figure that out. I'm not sure what direction we're going to go in as a board to maintain our police department or to look at different options. I can't speak for the board, but that's something that I would like to have conversations about, because what you have is you have policing at school, then you have policing in the community. Where's the dialogue? Where's the rehabilitation? Where is the restorative justice? Where's the trauma-informed? Where's all these different things, these different elements to serve our students? Because that's why they're in school. They're in school to learn, but we're here to serve them, to make sure they get the best possible education and opportunities afforded to them. But, you know, we go back to policing. I don't know, I have mixed feelings about that. I think there's a different approach to it. Again, I can't speak for my entire board, but I can say that I would like to look at those different options moving forward. I know some districts have ended their contract with their city police department, and they want to take upon themselves to have the flexibility on how they discipline their students or how they react to their students. And I think you should have that flexibility as a district. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Erica's saying it beautifully, man, it's right. It's the conversation is beginning, and so you know, even with speaking with some of my colleagues here locally on our board personally, or whether it be colleagues around across the state and across the nation. It's so crazy how quickly this whole thing has shifted. From wanting those police within the school, wanting those police within the school because of the aspect of school shootings and that kind of safety and everything, to now even having a conversation about how necessary is it to have those police within the building and everything. And so the thing is, when it comes to this one, this one is going to have to be a conversation that's had with the public, to really be able to dive in to what is going to be the most of most use to our students. I say that because you really do have different sections of the public viewing this thing completely different. So I happen to be in District 3 of Fort Worth ISD, which is predominantly Black and brown, definitely Black when it comes to the district in which I'm serving. And everything I'm hearing is we got to get the police out them schools. We got to get the police out them schools, right? And then I got colleagues that on the same board with me on a different side of town that don't look like my side of town, and they can't even fathom what that would look like not having officers present within the school building. And so, and it's not that either one of them are right or wrong, but there has to be the type of environment where both are heard. And what we have to do now, and I'm hoping that what this whole moment is teaching us, is that we have to be able to reimagine what an America looks like in a way that we really would hope to see it. And that's having a conversation about what is the role of policing. So understanding that policing, when first created, really was created to the oppression of people. It was to make sure that land and property of white people were protected. And at the time, we're talking about us being that property, right? And so if we understand that that's where all this thing is birthed out of, then we have to understand that if we're really going to move forward, there has to be a reimagining of what that role, responsibility, and authority is going to look like. And that's going to include in our schools. So the type of people that we have to have at the table now are people that are willing to be open-minded, to have actual dialogue, to be able to see the other side of the equation, to be able to make good intellectual decisions based upon what the people that we serve are telling us that they need and want. And so if we can do that, then we're going to make successful decisions about what's going to ultimately affect student outcomes. What is going to make our young people feel safe coming into the buildings in which we're bringing them into, and what's going to give them the best environment to be able to do what we're hoping is happening, which is this absorbing of knowledge for them to come in a little one way and be able to walk out a little better. Policing absolutely plays a role in that, and every agency we contract with, every program that we put in place, all the policies and procedures we have to be viewed under that lens of how can we reimagine. And that's the place that we're in right now, and the police are not immune to that. We also have to reimagine what their relationship looks like.
Thank you, Q. Makai, I'm going to come back to you. I know that you and I have had many of conversations about what school boards can do, what school boards should be doing. And so I guess we're going to tap into the action quadrant now a little bit. For all of our friends who might be new to the protocol, it's important to talk about the feelings. It's important to talk about the belief quadrant. And typically I'll speak for what's true for me. I have experienced is that friends who can't feel as much of the topic at hand are quick to go to the thinking quadrant and then probably even the action quadrant, and just want to model that it is important to bring the feeling and the believing into the space, and that people of color are feeling a lot during these times. And so if you're quick to want to stay in the thinking and want to get to the solutions, understand that this is an opportunity for you to be able to learn and grow. And those are opportunities that we get to listen to one another. And so with that, now as we begin to tap a little bit into the action quadrant, Makai, you have been on the front lines of pushing school boards and superintendents and leadership to do more at the state level and the national level. Obviously knowing that you've been doing work at your local level. What advice or what words of wisdom do you have for folks on the call on the webinar today on what school boards and even maybe state associations and the National Association ought to be doing revolving with the topic of race and equity? Because as Makai and I have both experienced, at some state levels, it's very uncomfortable, and we don't want to have that conversation. Reasons why the other sponsor of this is Leadership ISD. We're very intentional, very unapologetic about doing the racial and ethnic equity work. We can't always lean on state associations, and we can't always lean on national associations. So, Micah, you've been on the front lines of coming up with ideas and solutions. What advice and what words of wisdom do you have for school board members and administrative leaders on this call today for some action items?
So the first thing I would encourage folks to do is read. Sounds very basic, right? But seems to be the hardest thing for people to do is read. Everybody wants things to be synthesized. They want the Cliff Notes, the idiot's version. And I'm encouraging folks, read and understand. The other thing is this: stop talking about policy. The school board meeting is a bill pay session. You're paying bills at the meeting. You're not there to arbitrate, adjudicate matters. You're not. That either happens within committees or within the committee of the whole that's structured. Well, what do I mean by that? You pass equity policy, good. Go wave your flag, great. Now, is that equity policy actually tied to measurable student achievement? Does that equity policy talk about the distribution of resources, special education, student nutrition services, social emotional learning, speech and language, etc.? If you just say, Black Lives Matter, I stand with you, Ali, well, you live in a house that's $20 million. You don't stand with me. You just want to let me know that you're less guilty. So the reality is this: read and understand that there's a tremendous amount of policies already on the books. Take that, massage that, understand how to work that to drive systemic change within your school system. The other thing is this: the school board runs the show. You're the governing legislators responsible for managing the public's trust and the public education construct of that respective community. If you are abdicating all of your will to the superintendent and or the executive cabinet, then you ought to leave and resign. Get off. Go home. At the end of the day, the folk elected you to drive the change that they want and they seek through representative democracy. You serve as the people. You're the people, not you outside with the people advocating within the system. You know, you are the people, because we live in a republic, we live in a government that represents elected officials to serve in position and or capacity to advocate for the masses. Simply put, the other point, you have attorneys, you have associations. Understand the legislative process and the connectivity of the legislative process and the judicial system. For example, Compton Unified School District and I were involved in the lawsuit against the University of California system to abolish the the SAT and the ACT. Why was that significant and why was that important? Because children within the Compton schools have been historically marginalized and relegated to the California State University system and the community colleges, which are not the pinnacle. The pinnacle institutions in California are the UC schools, the University of California system. Now, that lawsuit will benefit the whole entire state. Concurrent and dual enrollment. The school board in this school district advocated concurrent and dual enrollment because we believe that if you give students an opportunity within the collegiate environment, you give them a chance to understand what it feels like to be involved and engulfed in that system. They can appreciate college, which is a system that's designed for independent operators. There's no compulsory nature within the collegiate system. The other point is early middle colleges, which we've led the charge on because we understand that it's extremely expensive to go to college. Why not give students an AA degree and a high school diploma at the same time? We're talking about English language learners. We've reclassified more students than many school systems within our immediate community because we understand that if children cannot communicate effectively in English, they're going to have a very difficult time trying to navigate the construct, navigate the channels and the canals of this very elaborate government system, which involves so much reading, so many forms, etc. The other point, Let's talk about school district finance. You pass a budget. If you're talking about equity and is not aligned within that budget, meaning we're talking about how do we look at implicit bias training? How do we look at restorative justice policies? How do we look at positive behavior intervention solutions? All of that needs to be understood at a top level by the school board. If you don't understand anything I'm saying right now, this is all foreign, resign. And let somebody else serve in the seat who really want to do the business of managing the public's trust. At the end of the day, it's good to post on Facebook, it's good to hit the gram, it's good to tweet, but you want to have a body of work even to run for re-election on. You want to have a body of work. Short of that, I want to go back to a word I used earlier, bloviation. You're puffing. You're just running your mouth, right? And people today, what we see out in these streets, the protest, people are sick and tired of talking. Fannie Lou Hamer says she's being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Folks are sick and tired of talking, and they're sick and tired of listening to bureaucrats and those who are responsible and charged with managing the bureaucratic order, give all of these elaborate speeches, all of this pontification, and students are still underachieving, which has been the case since folks left their plantations down in Georgia and Mississippi and South Carolina. So here today, we have an opportunity as school board members to drive the ship. If you're not driving the ship, jump off. Don't even swim back to shore. Just jump off. Because you're hurting the lives of children. And that, my friends, we do not have time for.
You're wild. I think that's why we love you, Makai. Q, Erica, I want to add to what can school boards be doing right here, right now? I mean, it's kind of the conversation I've had with a number of amazing individuals that it's a feeling as if almost, a lot of the doors have opened, and the fear associated with it is that they're going to close at any time. And so what can be done right here, right now?
Go ahead, sister.
Thank you. And I took the time to really, really, really think about it. And I got to say, Makai, you hit it right on the nail, right on point, like you said. When I think about what school boards can do, you have to look at what we're responsible for. And in Atlanta, and I have to share this with you all, and you probably already know, our school district was developed with segregation. Let's just start off with that. And policies that were put in place to make sure that Black students couldn't learn. And that same system we don't have segregation, but that same systematic process has to be broken. Now, we've made a lot of strides throughout the decades, throughout the years, but yet, when you ask the question, why I keep learning, we got to go back and look at what are we doing, what systems that we have in place. We can't blame it on poverty. I heard that a lot these past 2.5, 3 years. Kids in poverty can't learn. No, kids in poverty can learn. We just have to look at how we are teaching them, what supports that we're putting in place for them. That's going back, looking at policy, procedures, regulations, and looking at those and saying, okay, in these policies, procedures, resolutions, and regulations, are we serving the children? Are we disciplining them? What are we providing? How are we providing this? How are we measuring this? We have to pull back that layers, of the system and construct a system that's going to work for all kids, but put a focus on the kids that need additional help and support. Not saying that we haven't been doing that at Atlanta Public Schools, but we can do more of it. We can do more implementation, get more accountability with that. Not just putting it on paper and saying, hey, we got a policy, Okay, how good is that policy going to work if you don't implement it? How good is that policy going to work if you don't have measurable outcome? You know, and so we gotta, you know, as school boards, we gotta pull back those layers and have those uncomfortable conversations if we want to make change. And admit if you don't know, it's okay. But what can we do? What can we do to make it better? That's the question. How are we going to make it? You know, skipping around and dancing around what the real problem is not going to lead us where we need to go. We are failing our kids. Our kids are hurting, and we got to do better. We have to do better. And it starts back with looking at our system. Since we run the system, let's look at our system and give good direction to our administration of what we want to see, and not taking excuses why it can't happen, because it can happen. I had the opportunity to visit different school districts across the US, and I know it can happen. I've seen it in different districts, especially in Texas. I mean, just going down to Houston and going to one of the underperformed school districts and seeing how they turned around that entire school within 2 to 3 years. It doesn't take 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 years to do it now. But it's the board. The board have to be assertive, can't be fearful, have to stand in the truth of what needs to happen. Got to start with the board. Ownership.
Absolutely. Y'all said it perfectly. Both of you did. And so when we start getting into this aspect of solution and what role boards can play in everything, it really is as simple as this. Because for many of the boards, you know, and Makai hit it beautifully. Many of the boards, we're going to get behind a resolution to be able to say that, you know, we don't stand for racism. That should be an easy mark. And I do understand for some boards it may not be. I understand every municipality is different, but that should be the easy mark, is being able to put it on paper and to be able to say we're not racist and, you know, we stand against racism. So the real work that's going to have to happen is that this work is going to have to happen with our white brothers and sisters. And we're going to have to, at this point in time, they're going to have to be willing to go back to their constituencies and really preach and talk about what is right. Because we're going to be able to say equity, equity, equity within our school districts, but are we actually about to be about that work? And the thing is, if we are about that work of equity, what equity is going to mean is those who need the most will have first and the most. We're going to shift everything that we're doing. And so in our particular education system, what we see is that in every category academically that we see across the board, when we look at it and disaggregate this by race, we always see Black kids at the bottom of these lists. So if we see that Black kids are at the bottom of these lists, and then what are we going to do about that? And the time is out for the talking part. We're going to have to attack. And so if this is the outcome that we're going to try to maneuver, if we're going to try to say that, hey, if all of our Black kids are the ones suffering the most, you know, we're going to be willing to shift our resources and dollars towards making sure that they have the most. That's the work that's going to have to be done. And that work is going to have to be done by our white brothers and sisters. You got to understand that your constituency is going to get pissed off because they think that means taking away from their young people, when that is not the aim. The thing is, we want success for all of our students within our school districts. We want our white students to be able to shine and thrive, because they're going to go out and be ambassadors of us to the different various colleges and universities they attend, to the walks of life they go into. They're always going to be our product when they walk out of there. So we want their success. But the thing is that right now it's the inverse. Their success is leading to the detriment of success for our black and brown young people. And so if we're going to turn it on our head and say, white student, let's make sure that you remain successful, yet let's make sure that your Black and brown brother and sister, your Black and brown counterpart comes up, we're going to have to be able to make sure that those resources are shifted towards them. The attention is paid towards them to make sure that that gap lessens, because the gap is absolutely there. That part is not hard to convince anymore, whether or not there's an achievement gap. Now, what are we going to do about the achievement gap? Not just simply meet for the sake of meeting, but let's have an attack meeting. How are we attacking that achievement gap? And the way we attack anything worth anything is with our dollars. And so Makai said it earlier about what we're doing at school boards, when we're paying bills and we're shifting, when we're doing budgets, that's what we do best. So the thing is, our budget we need to make sure our budget reflects our values. And if our budget reflects our values and we say that we value Black lives, then how are we taking care of Black lives? How are we making sure that the schools that have the least, the students that have the least, can no longer say they have the least because we went into attack mode? And that's going to take white brothers and sisters being able to be uncomfortable enough to go back to their neighborhood and say, I'm standing for what is right. Our young people are going to be okay over here, have been for decades, have been for centuries. What about on the other side of the tracks? Let's go make sure they're okay too. And so if we can get unapologetic about that, if we can do the anti-racist work of that, if we can rail against whiteness in that way, and understanding that this system is built upon whiteness, and prioritize Black and brown young students, then those achievement gaps will be eliminated. And that's the work that school boards are going to have to do right now. And it's uncomfortable, but if we're going to be about it, we got to be about it.
Thank you, Q. I think I guess for me to pivot as we get ready to get some final words from the three of you, in that word that phrase you just gave of anti-racist, it's the conversation that these three entities have been saying. It's not enough these days for you to say you're not a racist. Now we need you to get into that anti-racist mindset. And the conversation that Forward ISD and a number of other entities have talked about for our white brothers and sisters on the call and on the webinar is, we allies are all fine and dandy. But at this point in time and what you're seeing right here, right now, we need you to be a co-conspirator with us. We need you in this fight as we're having these conversations, and boards and superintendents are saying, we don't want to talk about race, or we don't want to look at that data, or we don't want to look at those numbers, that you fight with us and that you stand with us as we get ready to try to shift the system in the direction it needs to be. I guess the final question I have for my three friends on the call today and on the webinar is, what are you envisioning? What are your hopes? What are your aspirations for our young people? And to begin to continue to isolate races, what do you particularly see for children of color in our school system that Q has just so eloquently described tend to typically be at the bottom of the student achievement? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are you envisioning? And then any final words from you as we get ready to close out in a couple of minutes.
Erica, feel free to start us off, sister.
In a perfect world, things wouldn't be so difficult. When you talk about what I envision for my students, all students, one of the things I always pride myself of always saying is reaching their full potential. What does that mean? Being the best that you can be in every aspect of your life, given the resources and the opportunities to get you there. And that's what I want to see for all students, but knowing that my African American students are having these challenges with race, with education, and not having the resources, and just different barriers they have to face day in and day out. That's hard to achieve. And so for me, that's what I want to see my students achieve, their full potential, to be the best that they can possibly be. It's simple, but it seems like it's taken so much just to get them there. Where does this, with all the current events, where does it leave me, I guess, leave our students? That's something I have to check in with them to see how they're feeling, what they're thinking. Because certain types of situation can make a child lose hope when they see that, they might not be able to go to college or go to trade school or do the things they have a passion for. They lose hope. I don't want these kids to lose hope, because when you lose hope, you give up. And when you give up, you have nothing to lose, and you're very dangerous. And, that's some of what you're seeing playing out in Atlanta. And some of us have lost hope. I don't want my students to lose hope. So I want to see them reach their full potential and have all the opportunities that they should have as human rights, as a human right, And education is a human right. And so that's why I said it's for them to reach their full potential.
Thank you. Q?
Yeah. So as far as what I want to see is, right now the system in which we're a part of is designed to do exactly what it's been designed to do, what we wanted it to do, unfortunately. And our young people are walking out of these school buildings learning exactly what we have wanted them to learn. And so the thing is, what I'm hopeful for in this moment is that we have a shift in what it is that we want them to learn. We've had these moments where we wanted them to learn to a state examination. And so we've pushed hard for them to learn that. We've had these moments where we want them to learn towards an end of course exam, and we've pushed them towards that. So the thing is, what I'm hoping is that in this moment we shift what we want them to learn, and we want these young people to walk out knowing better who they are and whose they are, knowing better about their history and heritage, along with the academic work that we want them to be able to have along discipline studies of science and math, and reading and literacy. And so right now is a moment where if we can shift that and say that we want these young people to walk out of our buildings understanding who they are, understanding the role they play in this world, and having an accurate portrayal of what history looks like, then what we're doing is we're building that better ambassadors for the future. And we're building a society in the future where we're not doomed to repeat our past, because if we truly can understand our history, then we won't have to repeat it. But unfortunately, what's happening is that we are leaving our young people ignorant when they walk out of the doors, thinking that they're educated in some manner, when really we have miseducated them, unfortunately. So if we can have a shift right now, if we really utilize this moment for a shift to say that we no longer will miseducate our young folks, but that they will know an accurate portrayal of history. They will have the history and heritage tied to the academics. I think that we really can have a future that we all can be very proud of.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I'll just take 1 minute and just simply state governance is important. I don't want to shy away from that fact. I think the governance discussion as espoused by many of the associations, it's simply flawed. It's flawed, and it's an old way of managing school systems that simply, it's failed students throughout this country, throughout the 600 or so classified urban school systems. There has to be a revolution within school board members to look at yourself not just merely as somebody who's talking about crayons and pencils and notepads, but someone talking about transformative leadership in every aspect and every facet of the management and the administration of a public school entity that's charged with more than simply educating children, but also being an economic hub, an economic catalyst within the community. So I would encourage members of the board, perhaps Dr. Ramos, we need to have a subsequent session to really delve into the essence of what governance means and how members of the school board ought to be empowered. But it's very important. I've watched school boards devolve into nothing more than just chaotic cesspools, cacophony of heathenism, because folks don't really understand their role. And I'm not talking about the fact that the superintendent is a CEO. Forget all them titles. We have to understand, if we're going to transform today leaning forward, we're going to have to drive that through governance and through assessment and evaluation of what's approved in that budget, holding folks accountable and not being afraid to fire people. Never get married or wedded to anybody to the point you can't let them go if it involves impacting the lives of pupils within your respective community. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to represent the Compton Unified School District.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being on here today. I want to thank our panelists, amazing human beings that spoke their truth, and we knew that they would. The reason why we knew reaching out to them that this is what they would do. I do want to throw a little plug in. We are expanding on the student voices with Leadership ISD. If there are any trustees in Texas that would like your young people to be a part of the inaugural statewide student voice conversation, we want to keep hearing young people's voices. we want to make sure we're shaping policy around their perspective and how they see the world and what they think is missing, and also to add to what they believe is working really well. Please reach out to me, Cinto, and reach out to Jamie, reach out to Ty. We'll be happy to partner with you. My friends, appreciate you, love you. Everybody stay safe. We'll see everybody back on next Monday. Take care.
Bye.